The new Lian Li Dan Cases A3-mATX can squeeze into its micro form factor frame a mATX motherboard, 415mm long 4-slot graphics cards, an ATX power supply, 10 fans and 360mm radiators. But with all this packed into a 26-litre chassis, does it make mini-ITX obsolete? Surely there must be some compromises. Well, that's what we're here to find out, so let's take a closer look at this case and see what all the fuss is about. So this new micro ATX case is a collaboration between Lian Li and Dan Cases. Dan Cases for the design and then Lian Li for the manufacturing and distribution of the A3-mATX. It is available to purchase now. It's available in black or white colour schemes. The MSRP price in US dollars is $69.99 and you can pick it up in the UK from Overclockers UK, priced at £69.95. The A3-mATX features a versatile micro form factor compact 26-litre capacity that supports mid-tower characteristics such as up to 415mm long 4-slot graphics cards, 360mm radiator or AIO installation and big CPU tower coolers. It also features mesh outer panels with an optional tempered glass side and a removable power supply bracket that can be located at the front or side of the case. So when I first saw this case, I thought, no way is it possible to fit all that hardware inside a case of this size. We've seen mini-ITX cases recently that are at least as big or if not bigger than this. So being able to fit micro ATX motherboards, full-size ATX power supplies, radiators up to 360mm long and up to 10 fans, with graphics cards also up to 415mm long, it does sound almost impossible that all that can fit in here. But Lian Li assures us that it all can, so let's take a closer look at the case. Let's remove the side panels first and see how these come off. Both the side panels and the top panel are ultra fine mesh. The side panels remove really easily. They're just on quick release fittings. Just push them out from the rear and then they just simply lift out, and you can see it is an ultra fine mesh, so there's no dust filters, no additional dust filters on these mesh panels. The other side panel removes in the same way. Just push it out from the back and it unclips. It's on those push pin quick release fittings, and again, no dust filter in this side. Top panel, there's 2 thumb screws to remove from the rear, so you just loosen those off. The panel slides back and then it just lifts out. Again, it's ultra fine mesh and there's no additional dust filter in here. The front panel is made from plastic, looks like ABS molded plastic, and again, that also removes really easily. Just quick release fittings, push pin fittings at the top, and then it just pushes out and lifts out of position. It is, I wouldn't say it's the best quality for a front panel, but you've got to remember the price of this case is only around £70, so I'm not expecting really high grade materials. Front I/O connectivity consists of 2 USB 3.0 Type A ports, a single USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C port, individual 3.5mm audio jacks for headphones and microphones. There's also a power button on there. Behind the front panel is the power supply shroud. This can support either a full ATX power supply, depending on the position and the location of it, up to 220mm long. It also supports SFX and SFXL power supplies. We'll look at the power supply installation later and the different locations you can install the power supply in the case, because the various locations alter the configuration of the cooling in this case. When you remove the side panel on this left-hand side, directly behind that, there's a radiator and fan bracket. On here you can install either 3 120 or 2 140 fans, or up to a 360mm radiator, so a 360, a 280 or a 240 can be fitted on here. Potentially a 120 radiator could also fit on here, but again, it depends on the configuration of the case with the power supply bracket. Depends on how much you can actually fit on this radiator bracket on this side. So just a couple of screws hold this in place. It's one at each side, and then that just simply lifts out. You can see it's just a steel radiator bracket. There's also a mount at the top of the case for fans and radiators. This is the same support as the side brackets. On here you can install up to 320mm fans, or 2 140s, or up to a 360mm radiator. And again, the actual fans and radiators you can install on here all depends on where this power supply is mounted. The only dust filter in the system is on the floor. It's one of those perforated metal mesh dust filters. It's just magnetically fixed to the case, easy to remove. You can see again on the floor there's also space for more fans. So on here again you can fit up to 320mm fans or two 140s. There's no official radiator support on here, but I guess it depends on whether you have, or the size of the graphics card you're running. I think it'll be difficult to install radiator and fans on the floor if you're running a dedicated GPU. If you're not, then potentially you could fit a radiator on the floor, but that doesn't sound like it would be necessary if you're not running a dedicated GPU. Also on the floor there's some feet, and they're kind of like two bars, one bar at the front, one bar at the rear. They have some rubber anti-vibration feet on those. As well as AIO support, you can fit CPU air coolers up to 165mm tall. Motherboard support is micro-ATX or mini-ITX. Turn the case round to the rear. You can see at the very top there's a Lian Li Dan logo, and then a 120mm fan below there, so you can install a 120mm rear fan in the case. There's a power connector here for the main power, and then that goes to an extension cable that plugs into the power supply directly. The rear I/O cutout for the motherboard, and below that there's 4 horizontal PCIe slots, and to access the screws from those there's a little door here that you need to open. You can access the screws and remove the slots. They are replaceable slots, so they're not like those that you just bend and snap off.
If you're looking for a new chair, then you should definitely check out Booley's. I'm currently sat on their Ninja Pro gaming chair, which is one of 3 models from their gaming series alongside the Elite and the Master. So if you're looking for something new to stick in your setup that you can sit on and game and work, then I recommend definitely checking out boolies.co.uk.
So around this side there's not a lot going on because there isn't much space at all between the motherboard tray and the outer case panel. Potentially there may be just enough to send your EPS power cables up here if they're flat cables and through these cutouts, but I'm not really sure about that. I'll find out that in a bit when I actually go on to build a system in here. I'm guessing those are just there really as hooks for the cables to be hooked onto in the other side. But you do have this storage bracket here. So in terms of storage support, this bracket can be either located here on this side or on the front of the case. And again, that depends all on where you mount the power supply, but this can accept up to 2 2.5-inch SSD drives. You also have some storage support on the floor of the case. So inside the case, you could mount either a single 2.5-inch SSD or a 3.5-inch drive there. So in total, the storage support is either 3 2.5-inch drives or 2 2.5s and a 3.5-inch drive. So to remove this again, it's quite easy. Just a couple of screws. Remove those 2 screws, and then this mount just lifts out. You can actually put this in various different positions, slide it down and lower it down, or even further right down at the bottom there, or it can be located on the front, and I'll show you that in a moment, because what we need to take a look at is the power supply bracket and the different ways of mounting that. So again, it's just a couple of screws that hold that in position. So I'll just remove those screws, and then you can lift the whole bracket out. It comes out from the front, and like the storage bracket, this can be placed in different locations. So it was in the top, it can be moved down to a central location, and then there's also a lower location there. Alternatively, the power supply can be mounted on this side as well. So again, there's 3 locations for it to be mounted on the side, but the top, and then there's a middle location, and then a lower location there. With the power supply mounted in the front 1 position, which is the top, that allows for up to a 415mm graphics card installed horizontally and 320 or 240mm top fans. If you drop the power supply down to the front 2 position, which is the middle position, then you can install up to a 344mm graphics card horizontally and 3 120 or 2 140mm top fans. And if you drop it further to the front 3 position. At the bottom, it's up to a 344mm graphics card and a 360 or 240 radiator or AIO in the top mount, or 3 120 or 2 140mm fans. Mounting the power supply on the side mount allows for up to a 415mm graphics card and 220 or 240mm top fans, and up to 320 or 240mm side fans, or up to a 360mm radiator on the side mount. But with the power supply mounted to the front, the case is limited to 2 120 or 2 140mm side fans, or up to a 280mm side mounted radiator. So depending on where you mount the power supply in the case, it changes the potential hardware configurations that are possible inside this A3-mATX. So I'm going to take that as a bit of a challenge, and for the build part of the video, I'm going to try and install as much high-end hardware inside the case as possible and hope that it is still usable. So what I mean by that is that it still runs at reasonable temperatures. The motherboard for the build is this MSI B650M Mortar. CPU will be an AMD Ryzen 9 7950X. And sticking with the AMD theme, we've got this Sapphire Radeon RX 7900 XTX Nitro Plus card. Memory is this G-Skill Trident Z5 RGB. It's a 64GB kit, DDR5 6400 mega transfers per second. For storage, I'm using a Corsair 1TB MP700. It's PCIe Gen 5 M.2 NVMe drive. The cooler I'm going to be using is this Silverstone Ice Mist 360. It's a 360mm radiator, all in one liquid cooler. I might run it with these Lian Li Unifans attached to the radiator. And then powering the system is this FSP Hydro PTM X Pro. So this is a 1200 watt PCIe Gen 5 ATX 3 power supply. So let's see if we can get all this hardware inside this little case and see if we can get it running to the temperatures that it should be. So build complete, the system is in slightly different configuration as it was when you last saw it in the build time lapse. That's because I've been playing around with some different cooling configurations to test the thermal performance. For the best aesthetics, the tempered glass side panel is the one to go for, which I've got on now, but as you'll see in the thermal testing, the mesh side panel is a little better for thermal performance. I've one or two things to mention in a moment about the build process, but overall it was quite easy to build a system in this case, even with all this high-end hardware. So from the usual case thermal performance test, which is a Cinebench R23 and 3D Mark Speedway combined stress test. If you want to see the testing methodology in full, make sure you head over to kitguru.net and there's a written review page with all the information on there. We tested thermals with the case in several configurations using a 360mm AIO CPU cooler. The best balance between CPU and GPU temperature and CPU clock frequency is with the mesh side panel and 2 side fans installed. However, we found that changing to the glass side or removing the side fans only contributed to a maximum 2 degrees C increase in CPU temperature, while the GPU temperature remained constant at 43 degrees C over ambient. Swapping the AIO fans so they acted as intakes, pulling in cooler outside air, reduced CPU temperature slightly, but this significantly increased GPU temperature, so we wouldn't recommend this configuration. Due to the lower CPU and GPU temperature with the case panels removed, the system is at its quietest with all panels removed, since the GPU fan speed doesn't ramp up as high. The system is at its loudest with the AIO set as intake, as the GPU temperature is high, therefore the fans are running faster. But in all other configurations, system noise is around 48 decibels, which is noticeable, but still at under 50 decibels, it's not too distracting. So overall, I quite like this case. I like the fact that it is quite a compact case at 26 litres, but it still managed to cram in mATX motherboards, 360mm radiators, tall air coolers, long graphics cards and ATX power supplies. I think it's great. I'd love to see more micro ATX cases like this. It's great that it's available in black and white colour schemes. There's multiple power supply and storage drive mount options that give the case great flexibility for alternative hardware and cooling configurations, and it's similar thermal performance as larger ATX cases. The only negatives I could think of during the build process is the 360mm radiators with certain motherboards. It's quite tight for space up to taller VRM heat sinks. It would be a major improvement to the case if the top radiator bracket and maybe the floor of the case was removable. It'd make it much easier accessing things while you've got hardware still installed into the case. Currently, if you need to connect anything to the top and the bottom of the motherboard, you do have to remove the radiator or remove the graphics card, so that'd be an improvement, at least if the top radiator mount would be removable. And the only other minor thing I can think of with this case that is a slight negative is there isn't really much cable management features built into the case. So round this side where you would normally do all the cable management, there isn't really any space for it. You can just manage to slip the EPS power cables up there. It doesn't make the side difficult to install or make the side bulge out at all, but you can feel that the clips for the side panel don't quite clip in place as strong with those there, so there isn't really any space around that side. I would just like to have seen some other cable management features, some tie down points, maybe near the power supply and near that storage bracket. You can hide the cables reasonably well. You can slide them up between the power supply and the front panel, and if you leave that storage bracket in place, that does give you a couple of options to tie cables to. So overall, it's a case that I really like. I'd like to see more micro ATX cases like this that are compact but still allow you to install the higher end 360mm radiators, long graphics cards and ATX power supplies. I think they give you much more flexibility over an ITX system, and we've seen some ITX cases that are even bigger than this, so I think this is a great job by Lian Li, Dan Cases. Just those few things that I mentioned would improve the case, but overall it's a really nice case. It's one that I would definitely think about using in the future. So that's the Lian Li Dan Cases A3-mATX. Let me know what you think of the case in the comment section. If you've enjoyed watching this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so. If you enjoy what we do here at Kit Guru and you want to help support us, you can always head over to the store and pick up some of our merch, or you could even subscribe to our Patreon. And as always, if you want to catch up on all the in-depth technical reviews, head over to the website.